Blog Talk Radio.
Alternative facts.
The following message is transmitted at the request of the United States government. At 12:07 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, numerous unidentified objects of unknown intent and unknown origin were detected at high altitudes over multiple locations of Earth's outer space by the National Radio Astronomy Observatory, and these objects are presumed to be some form of controlled aircraft. It is not known if more of these aircraft will arrive, or if they will attempt entering Earth's atmosphere. United States citizens are encouraged to monitor local media outlets, as more updates will follow as information becomes available. The following message is transmitted at the request of the United States government. Attacks by the undead have been reported in several states across the country. The dead are rising from their graves and are attacking the human race. At this time, it is expected that more attacks of this nature will occur in several other states in the next few hours. The intent behind the attack is unknown at this time. He has been observed that a byte or exchange of fluids is a method of transmission. This is an extremely dangerous situation if they crave the taste of human flesh. It is not known whether this event will last for hours, days, or even longer. Stay calm, as authorities have been dispatched to deal with these creatures. An all-clear siren will be sounded when this situation is under control. Pacific Standard Time, nor is detected a long-range nuclear missile launching. This missile is believed to be headed in the direction of all residents within a 400-mile radius of this area should seek a fallout shelter immediately.
Welcome to Within the Chaos with your host,
Rodney Shortridge,
and co-host,
Robin Dalton.
Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. You can listen in by going to blogtalkradio.com/withinthechaos, or listen in by phone. You can dial 323-870-4197. And you can also call in to ask questions to our guests at the same number, 323-870-4197. From deep within the heart of the Appalachians, I'd like to welcome everyone and thank you all for listening to Within the Chaos. My name is Rodney Shortridge, and I'll be your host tonight, along with my fiery redhead co-host, Robin Dalton. Well, I hate to tell everybody, but Robin Dalton is not going to be here tonight. But I do have another special co-host who will be on shortly, and her name is Jennifer Shortridge, my cousin out of Ohio. So Robin had some family issues she had to deal with, so it'll be me and her. So our guest for tonight is Randy Williams. Randy is the owner of Randy, how
Hey, Rodney. Pretty good. I'm not sure if I have a bad connection with you or if it's on your side, but you're really breaking up pretty bad.
It could be on my side. That's where my computer had to update. I had to go to Google Chrome to do my studio, and ever since then, people say I sound like I'm breaking up.
Yeah, real bad. I mean, I can barely make sense of you there. I'm not sure. Maybe one of the listeners could call in and say whether or not I sound the same way or if it's just on your side. I'm not really sure, but it's really difficult to understand you. I did have a really clear reception on the bits of news, and in fact, I can't stay and talk to you now because I understand that there's UFOs landing and zombies attacking, so I think I have to leave.
Okay. Well, at least you got that part of the show.
So that came in dead clear, but you are like really a mess. So I don't know. Maybe if your line lights up, someone else who's listening maybe could call in and say, are we both messed up? If nobody calls, it means we're both messed up. If somebody calls and says maybe your side is, I'm not really sure how to handle it, but I can't make too much sense out of anything you're saying. Not that I ever can, but I really can't now. Is there anybody that can call up and let us know if it's both of us or just his side? That if no one's calling, I got a feeling it means we're both messed up.
Let me try this. Let's see.
Can you hear me okay?
Oh, I can hear you fine.
And my transmission is clear to you?
Oh yeah, you're crystal clear. I hope I'm not breaking up as bad now.
Yeah. No, you sound kind of like the robot on Lost in Space a little bit, but worse because you could understand him.
Okay.
So, I mean, I can't really even make out if you were saying danger, or anything like that. You're a mess, dude.
Well, I do have somebody called in here. Let's see what they. Hello, caller. You're on the line. Can you tell me if you can hear me?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
I can hear Randy fine. You're breaking up very badly. Just the way Randy described it. I hear him very good.
All right. Thanks, caller.
Yeah, thank you.
Is there something we can do about it, Rodney? It seems that I'm coming in okay, but you're not.
Well, let me. I can try something else. Let's see here. Try this. Okay, let me go in here. I'm sorry about this, everyone. Okay, Randy, can you hear me now?
That might be slightly better.
Okay.
Yeah, that might be slightly better.
Okay. I believe that's the way we're going to have to go.
All right. Well, I'll try my best to make sense of what you're saying. Are you there? He's gone now. I don't know if that means I'm still on or not.
Oh, yeah, you're still on.
Oh, okay. There you go. All right. Well, let's have a shot at it, and I'll try to make out what you're saying to me, bud.
Okay. Well, how you doing tonight? And it's been a few months since you've been on the show. Can you give us a little history about yourself and, dive back into Jack the Ripper?
Sure. Okay. Well, my name's Randy Williams. I'm about 1,000 years old, and I'm a private investigator. I run a firm called Black Stallion Security and Investigations here in Pennsylvania. I'm from California. I am very, very interested in the Jack the Ripper case. I have been for many, many years, more than 40. And besides the Ripper case, I've always been very interested in Sherlock Holmes. And so it sort of came all together with my new book, which is called Sherlock Holmes and the Atom of Terror, in which solved the Jack the Ripper murder case along with the help of 3 of the world's top criminalists and forensic pathologists, Dr. Henry C. Lee, Dr. Michael Baden, and Dr. Cyril Wecht. And what we did was we took the solution that we've come up with and the evidence and put it into a fictionalized Sherlock Holmes novel, in which Sherlock Holmes basically does everything we did and takes the reader through it step by step. Something going on there.
Got an echo. Okay, I think I fixed that.
Oh, okay, yeah, maybe.
There we go.
Yeah, something sounds. Yeah, it might be a little better now.
All right.
Okay, yeah. Now that's normal.
I think I just had to wiggle a wire.
That's all it took, huh? Well, it worked.
Well, can you tell us about your co-authors? And they're very famous in the world of shoot, I can't even talk now. Forensics and criminology. It's sad when they got so many things going on.
Yeah, I know it's tough, and then plus with all them zombies attacking and UFOs and everything all at once. So
it's got me all messed up.
Yeah, I can imagine. It's got to be terrible. So, well, my co-authors, as you rightly said, they're very famous in the world of forensics. Dr. Michael M. Baden, who your viewers may remember from the TV show Autopsy. He used to have that show on HBO. Or you may have seen him on Fox News, where he was a news consultant. He still is, and they used to call him Dr. Death on Fox. But Dr. Michael Baden has been involved in a lot of really high-profile cases since his career began, probably 50 years ago now. He was involved in the John F. Kennedy autopsy, the O.J. Simpson victims. He did the autopsies on them. He was taken over to Russia by the Russian government to do the autopsies on Tsar Nicholas and the Romanovs. He did the autopsy for Sid Vicious, if you remember him, and he worked on the Klaus von Bülow case. Remember that movie? They had Dangerous Liaisons. Mm-hmm. I think it was called that. It might not have. I don't remember the name of the movie, but it was about the Klaus von Bülow case with where he supposedly murdered his wife Sonny. He was the lead pathologist in the Phil Spector trial, where he supposedly shot that Lana Clarkson, the actress, at his mansion in Los Angeles. He worked on Medgar Evers. That Michael Brown case, the hands up, don't shoot, it was Dr. Baden who came up with the true resolution to how Michael Brown died in Ferguson. He worked on David Carradine's autopsy and even Bruce Lee's. So he's a guy that knows his way around the courtroom and knows his way around the autopsy room. Wow. My second co-author was Dr. Cyril Wecht, who he's in Pittsburgh. He's been, the forensic pathologist for Pittsburgh for so many years. He has appeared on a lot of, nationally syndicated programs like, Forensic Files, 48 Hours, Dateline and all those. You see him all the time. Where he talks about the famous cases he's worked on, and he's consulted on a lot of current cases. But he worked on the John F. Kennedy and Robert F. Kennedy autopsies. He did Elvis Presley's autopsy. He worked on the O.J. Simpson victims also. JonBenet Ramsey, he did her autopsy. He was involved in the Mary Jo Kopechne. Remember the girl that drowned Senator Ted Kennedy when he went off the bridge so many years ago? Dr. Wecht was also on that Sonny von Bülow thing. Dr. Jeffrey McDonald case, the Green Beret guy that supposedly killed his whole family and claimed that hippies came in and did it. He did the autopsies on David Koresh and the Branch Davidian victims, or whatever you want to call them, the sect, that cult at Waco. Vincent Foster, who the Clintons' right-hand man, who had died under really suspicious circumstances in a park in Pittsburgh. So he's written a bunch of books and quite well known and respected. And last but not least is Dr. Henry C. Lee. He's Chinese. You probably saw him in the O.J. Simpson case where he testified. He was the Chinese criminalist who came on and said something's wrong here, and kind of broke the whole tainted blood aspect of the case. He worked on John Bonet. He's responsible for the rescue of Elizabeth Smart, that girl in Utah that was kidnapped and was gone for like a year. It was Dr. Lee that solved the thing, figured out who kidnapped her, and then they put out the all alert and found her alive. He's been with the Connecticut State Police for like 40 years. He has his own forensics laboratory as part of the University of New Haven in Connecticut, and he is recognized as one of the world's leading DNA and trace evidence experts. So those are my three co-authors.
Wow. What a long resume.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm just so amazed to have a group like that. I mean, I still have to pinch myself. It's unheard of. There have been others that have tried to get those three to collaborate on books, and they've never done it. And especially in the cases of Jack the Ripper. One of the most famous Jack the Ripper theorists out there approached all three of my doctors to participate in their book, and the doctors all refused, even after being offered money. And in my case, the doctors worked on my book for no pay. All they wanted were characters in the book based after them, which I did. Because, when I got together with the doctors and decided we were going to do a book on this theory, they all advised me that even as famous as they are, as well known and respected as they are, they told me, not a lot of people buy true crime books. And they said, it's not about the money, because in their case, they didn't ask for any money. But they said, if you really want to get this theory out there, you want a lot of people to know about it, and you really want it to shoot around the world, you have to present it in a more entertaining form. And so we kicked around a bunch of ideas. And as it turns out, all three of the doctors and myself, we've all been fans of Sherlock Holmes since we were kids. And in fact, all of us have gotten into criminology as a result of our interest in Sherlock Holmes. That's what got all of us interested, as well as all being interested in the Jack the Ripper case since we were kids. So it seemed very natural to decide to do this as a Sherlock Holmes novel presenting the case. We thought this way we could get more people, a lot of people that might not normally be interested in the Jack the Ripper case, but are interested in Sherlock Holmes, might find it interesting. Or people that weren't really Sherlock fans, but were Ripperologists or Ripper enthusiasts might get interested in the book. And then people who weren't really involved in either, but the combination of the two might intrigue them. We thought we might pull them in. And it seems to be working, because the book is thankfully doing really well in both the United States and England. Well, to me there is. I mean, there obviously there can't be, or can there? Because, of course, Sherlock Holmes was a fictional character. But I've uncovered evidence that shows that I believe that the actual Ripper was a reader of Sherlock Holmes. The first Sherlock Holmes story, A Study in Scarlet, first appeared in the London magazine called Beaton's Christmas Annual in 1887, in November of 1887, which was just months before the first Ripper killing. And it was something that everybody in London was reading. Like when the Titanic movie came out here and everybody was talking about it and watching it. Well, it was a sensation. And I believe, because of the Ripper's behavior, I believe that he was a reader of the Sherlock Holmes stories, and he actually modeled some of the aspects of his crimes after parts of Sherlock Holmes stories. In the very first story, which was called A Study in Scarlet in 1887, Sherlock Holmes finds this graffito, or a coded message written on the wall in blood above the bodies of two murdered victims. And Jack the Ripper left a graffito on the wall over a bloody apron that had been ripped from the body of a murdered victim, with what I believe was a coded message, very much like what appeared in the Sherlock Holmes story. So I see that there's this connection in that way. And of course, the Sherlock Holmes stories were all set in that same time period, Victorian England. And in a kind of a strange sort of story ripped from the headlines kind of thing. You know how nowadays if you watch like Law and Order and they talk about this story ripped from the headlines and they'll do kind of a takeoff on some current event crime. Well, I believe that Arthur Conan Doyle did that with the Ripper case because he wrote a story called The Cardboard Box, The Adventure of the Cardboard Box. And in that story, which was set in August of 1888, which was when the Ripper was killing, the client of Sherlock Holmes receives a cardboard box with 2 severed ears preserved in salt in the mail. And of course, in the actual Ripper case, George Lusk, the president of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee, which was a group of vigilantes that were running around Whitechapel beating up innocent Jews in the name of catching the Ripper since the cops couldn't, he received a cardboard box in the mail with the preserved piece of the victim's kidney in it. So I think that Doyle kind of took that aspect of the true Ripper case and put it back into a story. But I think the Ripper took something from Arthur Conan Doyle that Doyle never realized in 1887 with that Study in Scarlet graffito.
Mm-hmm. Well, would you say the Ripper was an intelligent killer or just a lunatic?
I think that, well, first of all, I might as well get it out there now. I believe that the Ripper were 3 men being funded by a 4th man. And I think that 2 of the 3 men, one was extremely intelligent, one was at least mildly intelligent. The 3rd one was a 17-year-old boy who was very uneducated, didn't speak English, and was probably was definitely the most twisted of the group and was probably the most psychotic of the 3. So you sort of have a combination of things. You've got a very highly intelligent planner. You have a guy who's kind of the muscle, the brawn, the lookout guy. And then you've got this sort of lunatic, psychotic teenager who was doing the most brutal of the mutilations on the victims.
Okay. Well, I understand the last time that we had you on the show, I understand you've been approached to discuss the possibility of a TV documentary series about your theory.
Yeah, and I think it's because of your show, actually. But I was approached. I'm working with a guy named Richard Leck, who produces TV documentaries for A&E and the History Channel. And Richard is very interested in doing something. He doesn't know whether he wants to do a documentary or whether he wants to do a movie with Sherlock, without Sherlock, or all 3. He's very excited about the idea. So we're meeting very soon about it, and hopefully you're going to see something along the lines of you might have seen this American Ripper series that's on lately, and it's on the History Channel. And I think that basically it'll be something similar. It would fill the same sort of time slot next year on the History Channel if that works out the way we hope it does. So I'll keep you posted on it, but it looks pretty promising right now for there to be a TV show that basically takes the viewer through my case bit by bit and covers each bit of the evidence and what it means to the overall case, without the Sherlock Holmes element, just purely the case itself.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, can you explain the investigating process that led you to the men that you called the 4 Jacks? What evidence do you have against them individually and as a group?
Oh, yeah, sure. Well, I call them the 4 Jacks because I feel that they're kind of like the jacks in a deck of cards. it's not that I think that they particularly called themselves that, but I believe that they sort of work together in a group, and they fit perfectly like the jacks in a deck of cards, because you've got who I call the Jack of Hearts, and that would be Louis Diemschutz. He was a guy who claimed to have found the body of Elizabeth Stride, one of the victims of the double event. So you probably know there was one night when Jack the Ripper had promised in a postcard that he was going to do a double killing, and he in fact did. And in that double event, there were 2 women murdered. One was Elizabeth Stride. Both were prostitutes, or what they called unfortunates back then. And the first of the 2 was Elizabeth Stride, and she was found, and I say that, with quotation marks, she was found by Louis Diemschutz, who claimed to be a seller of costume jewelry, who was coming home to the International Working Men's Educational Club, which was a socialist anarchist club, where he was the steward, kind of like the president of the club. And he is one of the guys that supposedly found this body of Elizabeth Stride. When he went inside the house and started shouting that he had found this woman who he didn't know was drunk or dead, out of the house came his wife, Sarah Anna Diemschutz, Isaac Kozbrodsky, the 17-year-old I described earlier, and a guy called Samuel Friedman, who the muscle that I described earlier. These 3 guys came running out of the clubhouse first, followed by 20-some odd guys that were upstairs singing. And just oddly, those same 3 people that came out of the house first were arrested with Louis Diemschutz in a violent crime less than 6 months after the night of the double event, with a bunch of strange coincidences that I'll probably explain to you later. But when it comes to the evidence that I have against them, or the process, what I have is a system. When I do an investigation, I have a system that I use, that I developed through the years, and it's a kind of a computer, but it's not electronic, but it computes, so I call it a kind of a computer. And what I've done is I've studied hundreds of murder cases through the years, many serial killing cases that have taken place since the Ripper crimes. And what I've done is I've written out a series of commonalities, things that are more often than not true of the different cases. If you look at 100 serial killing cases, you'll start to realize, gee, there's a lot of things that keep happening over and over in all these cases. I keep seeing this factor and that factor, and it's so common. It seems like it's part of a formula. And so what I've done is I've created this sort of formula or series of filters, you could call them, where I take all of the evidence and the names of the people involved in the case, no matter how vaguely or peripherally they're involved, and I drop them through these series of filters that are strategically ordered to sort of eliminate the people that are innocent. But the people that are guilty keep falling through, so that when I'm done at the end of the process, I'm left with 3 to 5 names out of close to 1,000 that started. And what I did was, in order to sort of check the accuracy of my system, I've taken old cases that have been solved, and without sort of biasing myself, I've dropped all the names through the filters that were at the beginning of the case, and at the end, my killer was one of 5 names that dropped out. So I did it. I back-checked it with, say, John Wayne Gacy and Jeffrey Dahmer and, the Green River Killer, the BTK and all these different people. And I've dropped these cases through my set of filters, and the killers always end up coming out at the end. So what I did is I did the same process with the Ripper case, and out at the end dropped these 3 guys that I mentioned to you, as well as 2 other names that I don't want to say because I know that those 2 guys are innocent. I've proved them innocent through other means. And one of the things that I really, really despise that happens a lot in the Jack the Ripper case and some other cases is people naming names and blaming people and calling them a killer without adequate evidence to back that claim up. And there have been a lot of people whose names have been dragged through the mud, and they've been accused of these heinous murders, mutilations, killings of women without any evidence whatsoever. And the reason there's no evidence, because they didn't do it. And these, certain people who aren't real detectives will come up with these kind of fabulous theories and blame people and just completely ruin their reputation or slander their name without adequate evidence. And I won't do that. So I wouldn't name the names besides my 3 suspects that fell out along with their names. But that's how I came up. So, for example, I'll take certain factors. Like we all know now, in the modern day, we all know that most serial killers strike within a comfort zone of their own home. And so we know that they kill in areas where they feel comfortable in a certain radius of their home. And so you can drop all the names through there, and most of them won't make it through. Now, that doesn't completely eliminate the people who don't fall through, but it discounts them. Their percentage of likelihood goes down greatly. And if they fall through another 2 or 3 filters, they get included. If they get stuck in those other filters, they get dropped. And I have a series, I think it's 27 such filters that I drop the people through. And then at the end, voila, I usually have my suspect.
Okay. Sounds fascinating. Well, besides being a private investigator and working in the corrections field in Pennsylvania, you're also a martial artist in the Wing Chun style of Kung Fu. Do you find that your martial arts background, has helped you in your investigation in any way of the Ripper?
Oh, yeah, very much so. You wouldn't think so, Rodney, but it does. Because in the Wing Chun style of martial art, for your listeners who don't know much about Wing Chun, first of all, it's a style that Bruce Lee came from. He created his own art later on in life, but his original style was Wing Chun. And in fact, his top student was my teacher, the great Sifu Ted Wong, who passed away some years back. But I have that kind of connection with Bruce Lee. And the way that the Wing Chun system works, it's very, very detail oriented. It's very logical. It's very scientific. It is very much like the process of investigation. The process of learning Wing Chun is very much like the process of learning in investigation and just being logical. And so what a friend of mine, a guy that I train in martial arts, and he's a pretty well-known rock star. His name's Zoltan Bathory. He's the lead guitarist and founder of this band called Five Finger Death Punch. You probably heard of them. Zoltan recently told me that the reason he thinks I solved the Ripper case was because of Wing Chun. He told me, he said, it took someone with classical Western investigation training with the Eastern outlook and logic of the martial arts to be able to get inside the mind of these Eastern Bloc murderers who were old school, very old school people from Russia and Poland who had a different mindset to the Western mindset. And Zoltan told me that he thought that the reason I was able to do these investigations on these guys and come up with the correct result was kind of a hybrid blend of my Wing Chun skills and my investigation skills. And I think he might be right.
Mm-hmm. It might be. Well, although you have your own solution to the Jack the Ripper murders, what is your take on some of the more popular theories on the Ripper's identity? Such as H.H. Holmes, the theory and the idea of a female Jill the Ripper.
Oh, the Ripper! Oh my God! Yeah, the female Jill the Ripper. Yeah. All right. Well, everybody's talking about H.H. Holmes right now, and what's really funny is half the people on Twitter are saying, "Oh my God, Sherlock Holmes was Jack the Ripper." No, it's not Sherlock Holmes. It's H.H. Holmes. Sherlock Holmes didn't exist. All right. But anyway, H.H. Holmes was this, for people who don't know who he was, he's the featured guy in this American Ripper series. And H.H. Holmes was an American serial killer who was murdering people just shortly after the Jack the Ripper killings had happened in England. And this guy, H.H. Holmes, his real name was Mudgett, Herman Mudgett. But H.H. Holmes sounds a lot better. He probably named himself after Sherlock Holmes. But anyway, this guy, Herman Mudgett, was a guy who was killing people in a completely different manner to Jack the Ripper. He was doing murder for profit, which is completely different than the motivation for the Ripper killings. His victims weren't prostitutes. It wasn't a there wasn't a sexual aspect to the killings. He killed people that he knew, which is another thing that Jack the Ripper didn't do. Holmes's MO was completely different, and these serial killers, although they'll change their MO from a hammer to an ice pick, they don't go from poisoning to gassing to knife murder. They're just completely different MOs. But above and beyond all of that, there's absolutely zero evidence that H.H. Holmes ever set foot in England. So that's a big one, because you kind of have to be in the country where you commit the murder. Mm-hmm. And not to mention what I'm about to mention, not to mention the fact that the Ripper was seen by a number of eyewitnesses and absolutely identified as a Jewish male, between 26 to 30 years old, except some people said he was 18 and some said he was 40. Well, that's because there was one 17-year-old, one 26-year-old, and one 41-year-old. That's why people described him three different ways, because he was three different men. But in any case, he was always Jewish. Now, an H.H. Holmes as an American would have stood out like a sore thumb in Victorian England. And I'm pretty sure that anyone who saw him and heard him talk would not confuse him for an Eastern Bloc Jewish man, but would call him as an American. As a matter of fact, one eyewitness who saw Jack the Ripper was a Jew and described the Ripper as being a Jewish man who shouted to another Jewish man across the road a Jewish man's name, and then that second man chased him away down the road. So we know that the Ripper had an accomplice, for one thing, and we know that he was Jewish because, even if you want to say that a non-Jewish person would confuse an American for a Jew from the Eastern Europe, if you think that's even possible, it'd be very difficult for me to believe that a Jewish man from Hungary would confuse another two Jewish men from an American for two Jewish men. So H.H. Holmes theory, no, it doesn't hold water. Jill the Ripper, okay, the female Jack the Ripper version, there's this kind of story going around that it's this, it could be a midwife, a lady that delivered babies or did abortions, was disgruntled. You know what? No, it wasn't a woman. The Ripper was seen, for one thing. He was seen by people like Matthew Packer and Israel Schwartz. He was a man. He was not a woman. So, this isn't the type of crime that women commit against other women. It's unprecedented in history, and it never happened afterwards. No, it wasn't Jill the Ripper. That's a fanciful thing that, armchair detectives will come up with. But, yeah, no.
Well, can you tell if the Ripper was right-handed or left-handed, or does it matter whether they was right-handed or left-handed?
Well, yeah, that's a good question, man, because, the doctors that I work with are very adamant in saying that you cannot tell the person's handedness by the wounds because of the simple fact that you don't know the position he was in when he did the killing. Because if I'm standing in front of you and I have the knife in my right hand and I'm holding it with the point towards my thumb and I slash, you'll see the cut. But what if I was holding it with my left hand with the point away from my thumb and did the backwards cut? You can't always tell. And in fact, I think they would probably say you can never tell. Now, at the same time, doctors back in those days, for whatever reason, when they examined the wounds, some of them were pretty dead set that they were committed by a left-handed killer. Well, but not in every case. But for example, the Catherine Eddowes murder in Mitre Square, the doctors there were pretty sure that the murderer was kneeling on the right side of the body with her head facing towards his left hand. If you could imagine kneeling down next to a body, the head pointing towards your left hand, and that the killer did all the damage with his left hand. And I imagine that they tried positioning themselves around the body different ways, holding the knife different ways, and that may be how they came up with that idea. But my doctors don't believe that that's actually real science. So it's kind of depends on who you want to listen. Who you want to listen to. It's even today there are all kinds of debates that go on in these knife murders, like the O.J. case, where people will try to assign the handedness of the killer. But my doctors are constantly testifying in court that it's not really possible to tell whether that person was right or left-handed.
Okay. Well, why do you think the Ripper hated women, so much that he would distort their faces and body the way that he or they did?
Well, I'm not sure. In fact, I'm pretty sure that the main guy, Louis Diemschutz, didn't actually hate the victims at all. I think the mutilation was done for its shock value. I think that the killings themselves were done in order to draw the public attention to Whitechapel, the area that the killers wanted the world to see, the area of London that was disease-ridden and poverty-stricken, prostitution, crime, famine. This was in the height of the British Empire, and they wanted to draw the attention of the world to this really impoverished section of London that was just a stone's throw away from Buckingham Palace. And so I don't think that the Ripper hated these women. As a matter of fact, I'm going to stick my neck out here and say, I think in a twisted way, the Ripper, as far as Louis Diemschutz is concerned, I think he was actually trying to help the prostitutes as a group. But like any war, there would be casualties. And I think that he looked upon these girls that were killed as martyrs. He even called them that when he referred to them in the newspaper. He called them martyrs rather than victims. I think he believed that they died for a cause. And I think that he looked at, like if you look at ISIS today, they'll run a truck through a crowd of 100 or 1,000 people and just randomly kill in order to draw attention to their cause. But I think that the Rippers were a little bit more discerning in their choice of victims in order to draw attention to their cause. I think they thought, well, somebody's going to have to die here, and it's not going to be one of us. So if we murder prostitutes, first of all, that's very salacious. That's going to bring the world's attention to this part of London because people pick up a newspaper, grisly prostitute sex killing. Everybody's going to read that story. And so they used that, and I think that they looked at the prostitutes as martyrs more than victims, and they didn't really hate them, but they thought, listen, somebody's got to die here. Let's say like the Vietnam War, how many American guys and gals went over there and got killed in order for us to, not win anything? There are casualties of war, and I think that the Rippers, rather than just randomly killing a group of people like ISIS does today, I think they handpicked their victims. And you know what? In the process, many prostitutes were benefited because Queen Victoria was forced to clean up Whitechapel and create programs and do things to fix to remedy the situation in Whitechapel. So in a sense, those girls were martyrs because their death wasn't for nothing. I mean, it's not that they deserved to die or anything else, but in their murder, there was some benefit to the rest of the prostitutes after the Ripper killings. So I think the only one that really enjoyed the work would have been young Isaac Kozebrodsky, the one that did the mutilation to Catherine Eddowes' face and did the worst mutilations to the other victims. I think that he was a little psychopath, a little, he might not have ever become a murderer if he never would have been prompted to do so by Louis Diemschutz. But I think that once he got a taste of the violence and the murder, I think he began to really enjoy it. As you can see, the violence escalating from one attack to the next attack to the next murder to the next, and the Mary Jane Kelly murder where she was just completely mutilated beyond recognition. And I think that he was the one that Diemschutz commissioned to do the real dirty work, the wet work, the mutilations. I don't know that Diemschutz would have had the stomach for that. I think he had Samuel Friedman to be the lookout, to be the muscle, to intimidate any witnesses or chase them away, which he did, or to look them up the next day and warn them to keep their mouths shut, which he did. And I think he got himself this kid, Kozebrodsky, who was very malleable, impressionable. I think, the kid would probably worship Diemschutz and probably did anything he was told. But once he started getting a taste of the violence and the killing, I think he began to enjoy it. And that's where you see the escalating mutilation going on.
Wow.
Great.
Well, I got my special co-host on, Jennifer Shortridge. Jennifer, say hi.
Hello. Hi, cousin. Hello, Randy. I'm sorry I'm late.
Hi, Jennifer.
Hello. So, Randy, here's a question for you. How do your eyewitness statements compare to your suspects?
Oh, okay. Well, eyewitnesses, I mentioned before, there were a number of people that saw the Ripper. And they described the Ripper generally as being a Jewish man, foreign accent, well-dressed. They called it shabby genteel, meaning a guy who at one time had money, but maybe his clothes were a little worn out. But they described this guy as being 26 usually to 30 years old, which Louis Diemschutz was 26 at the time. They describe a Jewish man, which Louis Diemschutz was a Jewish man. They describe his facial hair. They describe his mode of dress, exactly the way he was dressed when he posed for the newspapers the day he found the body of Elizabeth Stride. He was wearing exactly the clothing that the Ripper was described as wearing. The Ripper was described by eyewitnesses as wearing a load of costume jewelry, a heavy gold chain with a large red jewel dangling from it, a horseshoe tie pin. And these are items of jewelry that men didn't walk around the East End of London wearing in those days, because it was, you'd get robbed and killed wearing real jewelry, and it had to be costume jewelry anyway. There wasn't such a jewel, a red ruby that big. So costume jewelry. Well, guess what? Louis Diemschutz, when he found the body of Elizabeth Stride, he told the police he was a dealer in costume jewelry. So here's a very uncommon item for men to wear in the 1800s, let alone now. The costume jewelry, and he's a seller of costume jewelry. Now, an early victim of the Ripper, this woman, Emma Smith, she was attacked and lived for 4 days before she finally died as a result of her wounds. She described as being attacked by 3 guys. One of them, she said, was about 19. One, she said, was 26 to 30. And the other, she said, was somewhere around 40. Well, in that particular year, Diemschutz was 26, Kozebrodsky was 17, and Friedman was 41. So the eyewitness descriptions, when people would spot the Ripper, they would always describe either a teenager, a 25 to 30-year-old, or a 40-year-old, but they described like very similar appearance. And I think that was either by design or just the fact that Jewish men back then, and even some today, they dress in a specific way. They wear this coat called an astrakhan coat, and there's a specific kind of hat that you see them wearing. And I think that because they were dressed alike, and they probably had very similar facial features, they probably looked like a father, a son, or 2 brothers and a son or something. I think they probably looked so much alike that people might have thought they were all the same guy.
Well,
what was the International Working Men's Educational Club, and what significance does it have to do with the Ripper case?
The International Working Men's Educational Club was, in fact, anything but an educational club. It was a socialist anarchist club whose agenda was to destroy England. Their theme song was called a death song, and it encouraged people, don't kill one, don't kill 100, kill them all. This group, the International Working Men's Educational Club, was a group of guys that were anarchists, socialists, who were deathly against the British Empire. And Louis Diemschutz was the steward, or kind of like the club president. Samuel Friedman and Isaac Kozbrodsky were club members. This educational club, which, by the way, still is in some form in existence today, was really concerned with the rights of the Jewish workers, specifically tailors and machinists, hat makers, which, by the way, the Ripper was said to have worn a variety of like 15 different hats and 15 different coats. And Diemschutz's wife, Kozbrodsky, and Friedman were all hat makers, and Friedman was also a tailor. Who would have access to a million hats and coats but a hat maker and tailor? Anyway, this the International Working Men's Educational Club were fighting for the rights for the Jewish worker, because there was this system in place back in Victorian London called the sweating system, and it was really serious exploitation of Jewish workers. They were doing slave labor at slave wages, and they were basically forced to live in the area of London called Whitechapel, where the Ripper murders took place. And the International Working Men's Educational Club ran a newspaper called The Worker's Friend, in which they kind of tried to rally together the Jews and tried their best to sort of end the Jewish plight. And they play strongly into the Ripper case because, don't forget, the body of Elizabeth Stride, the first of the double event murder, the Ripper's tour de force, grand finale, well, it wasn't grand finale, but their grand performance, one of the bodies was found in front of the Working Men's Educational Club, where Diemschutz was the steward. And I believe that they did that to bring attention to that club, to bring the world's attention to their doorstep, which it did, because the day after the double event, every newspaper in London was at their doorstep paying them to have a look inside and, walk into the gateway and look at where the body had lain. And they were paying Diemschutz to pose for pictures. They were paying him to, reenact how he came in his horse and buggy and found the body and so forth. So in their own newspaper that was published in Hebrew and I translated, Diemschutz is over there gloating and laughing about how these idiot Gentiles gave him money to reenact all the crimes and show him the crime scene, thus funding the socialist effort that was designed to destroy their very country.
Well, can you explain what alerted you to the suspect, the man or the men that you've named as Jack the Ripper?
Yeah. The first thing that alerted me to them is the fact that, like I told you with my filters, I dropped out these names. And so I was left with these 5 names. And I thought, okay, I know I've heard this one name of Louis Diemschutz, but I have no idea who these other people are. And so I started running down these other people. And I was able to quickly eliminate 2 of them as the murderer. But there were these other 2 names that I couldn't eliminate. And then what really got my curiosity going was the fact that these 2 guys were both arrested with Louis Diemschutz together in a violent crime less than 6 months after the double event, where they all 3 found the body. Because as it turns out, in the history books, all you read about is that Louis Diemschutz found the body. But if you really go into detail and you read more and more about what happened that night, you'll find out that Diemschutz ran inside the clubhouse and out popped his wife, and then Isaac Kozbrodsky, and then Samuel Friedman. So you go, wait a minute. Well, actually, Samuel Friedman, he didn't say that in the English newspapers. He said it in the Hebrew newspaper that he published. He said that Friedman was there. in the English newspaper and at court, he forgot to mention Friedman was there. But he did remember to mention it in the Jewish newspaper. In any case, you find out, wait a minute, these three guys were together along with Diemschutz's wife, and all of them, including Diemschutz's wife, were arrested for a violent crime 6 months later after the Ripper crime. And then when I started looking more into the details of that particular violent crime that they were arrested for, I thought, oh my God, I'm finding all these connections to the Ripper killings in these other crimes they were arrested for. And then I thought, okay, I have to start looking at these guys harder. And what I do then is I try to prove them innocent. And the more I tried to prove these guys innocent, the more I stumbled on more and more and more evidence making them look guilty. And the harder I tried to disprove them being the Rippers, the more I found that showed they were, in fact, the Rippers.
Well, what part do you think his wife might have played in the crimes? And, what are the two bits of insider knowledge that he had that only the killer could have known?
Right. Well, here's why, what I think his wife did. We know that his wife was present when he found the body of Elizabeth Stride. And the night that he found the body, and I say that, with quotation marks, the night he found the body of Elizabeth Stride, he told the police, he said, I saw that his story is so full of holes, it's ridiculous. Maybe we'll talk about that later. But one of the things he said to the police is, I found this girl and I wasn't sure if she was drunk or dead, but I didn't want to panic my wife because she's a very delicate constitution woman. Things like this are very upsetting to her. She would just, it would just destroy her. So I tried to downplay it. I'm paraphrasing, but this is what he said. So this woman, we're imagining this delicate flower of a woman who would be so upset by a drunken or dead woman in the doorway. Well, 6 months later, this delicate flower of a woman, when her husband is being arrested for beating a policeman with a club and kicking him in the leg, almost breaking the guy's leg, the husband gets cuffed up, and she jumps on the back of the policeman that put the handcuffs on and starts beating him with a stick, a hair broom. Which one is it? Is she a delicate flower or is she a hellcat? 'Cause she actually attacked the policeman.
Wow.
So, I'm thinking, okay, what I think actually happened is when Diemschutz came home and pretended to find the body and alerted the group in the kitchen, I think he may have taken a couple of minutes first for his wife to grab his bloody coat and gloves and wash them or stash them and get him new clothing and everything else before sounding the alarm to the rest of the guys upstairs. I think he might have been there 5 minutes before they started screaming for the guys to come downstairs that were upstairs singing. I think his wife helped him cover it up. And I think that there were a couple of other situations that his wife might have helped with. I think that later on in the evening, I think that Kozbrodsky had to sneak back into the clubhouse after the second murder and join the group as if he was never gone. And I think he climbed up the roof, and I think Diemschutz's wife probably opened a window for him, probably distracted the police for him by, making tea or something while he snuck back in with the group. Also, there was this guy called Sadler who was a suspect in one of the killings, the later killings. And Sadler was walking around with this prostitute who ended up getting killed later in the night, which is why he was a suspect. But during the course of the night, somebody came up to him, a woman distracted him, and then some guys beat him up and stole his watch, he says. And I think that was Diemschutz, Kozbrodsky, and Friedman. And I think that Diemschutz's wife was the woman in red who distracted him. I think that she went up to him and said, hey, come here for a second. And then these guys jumped him and beat him up. Why? Because he was going to get in the way of their plan to kill this woman. So I think Diemschutz's wife had more than a little to do with it.
Wow.
Now, when you ask me about the insider knowledge Diemschutz had, this is something else that makes Diemschutz look pretty terrible. When you read his statement to the police, one of the things that Diemschutz said was, the woman that I found in the doorway tonight, she was dressed quite a bit better than the woman that was murdered last week. Well, the problem with that is that the woman that was murdered before, a couple weeks before, Annie Chapman, her clothing was completely covered in blood. And, so nobody knows how well or poorly she was dressed because her clothes were all, disheveled and covered in blood. And there was never a photograph of her published in any newspaper. So how did he know that this victim was dressed better than the last one? Well, I know how he knows, because he killed her. But that's how he knew. How else would you know? Secondly, he said to the police, and so did Kozabrowski, they were the only two witnesses that said this, they both said, the girl had, when we saw her laying there dead, in the pitch black, by the way, that you couldn't see, they said she had grapes in one hand and candies in the other hand. They both said that. Here's the problem. She had candies in one hand, all right, but she didn't have any grapes. But later on, 2 days after the murder, two private detectives named Grand and Batchelor went back to the crime scene, and they found some bloody grape stems caked in blood, which means they were there before the murder. So what had happened was, I believe, they gave the woman grapes, to lure her. But when she was killed, she dropped them. And nobody at the crime scene noticed them. It wasn't like crime scene guys today that pick up everything, in the vicinity. Back then, they just thought it was garbage and had nothing to do with the killing, so no police or doctors took note of the grapes. But Diemschutz and Friedman both stepped on their meat by saying they saw the grapes in her hand. Well, you know why they saw them in her hand? Because she had them in her hand when they killed her. But they didn't realize that she dropped them. They saw the candies, maybe, and thought she had clutched the grapes too. But they both made the mistake of telling the newspaper and the police she had grapes in her hand when she didn't.
Wow.
So, Randy, can you explain to me how Diemschutz's profession had connected him to the crime?
Yes. Diemschutz, the day he found, quote unquote, the body of Elizabeth Stride, he told the police that he was a traveler in costume jewelry, meaning a guy who goes to the market and sells costume jewelry, which, by the way, he was Jewish, and he said he was at the market all day that Saturday and night, which is not true. It doesn't sound true to me because Jewish men aren't supposed to work on Saturday. That's their Sabbath. And it doesn't make sense. But anyway, he says he's a seller of costume jewelry. And here's the thing. Two of the victims of the Ripper are known to have bought and sold costume jewelry for a living. Not to mention the fact that the Ripper himself was described as being covered in costume jewelry. But two of the victims, Annie Chapman, the one I mentioned earlier, bought and sold costume jewelry for a living besides being a prostitute. So did victim Martha Tabram. Martha Tabram, the night before she was murdered, her husband gave her his paycheck to buy costume jewelry so that she could resell it and not prostitute herself. She was killed in George Yard stable behind her house, which is where Diemschutz kept his horse and buggy stabled. In his statement to the police, I keep my horse and buggy in George Yard stable. Now, Martha Tabram had been killed in George Yard stable, and what was she doing at 2 o'clock in the morning at the same time that Diemschutz comes home from work? She was coming back from being a prostitute, but she was also in the market for costume jewelry. So I think that what happened was Diemschutz, who lived like blocks away from her and kept his horse and buggy behind her house, I think they knew each other. And I think Diemschutz said, oh, hey, I'll see you at 2 o'clock Sunday morning, or Saturday morning, and I'll bring some costume jewelry for you to see. And it's right behind your house. So I think she came there thinking she was going to meet him to buy costume jewelry, and instead they murdered her. So you can see that the costume jewelry keeps coming up in this case. And also, none of the victims, not a one, had a hat pin. Some of them, their hats fell right next to their head. But we know from reenacting crime scenes that when a hat falls off, it falls off at the beginning of the struggle, not at the end. But these women, their hat was laying right next to their head. And none of them, not a one, had a hat pin. Well, it's sort of strange because women in the 1800s, they prided themselves on their hats, and the hat pin was an absolute must, especially to a prostitute who could, she would work for a loaf of stale bread or 2 pennies. And so for her, a hat was, made her more attractive, and it was a very expensive thing. and they would want to keep it secure with a pin, which, by the way, they also used for self-defense. They would buy such a pin from who? A costume jeweler. And if a killer was committing crimes and was taking souvenirs, which we know he took the rings off of Annie Chapman's finger, which were costume jewelry, by the way, what would he take? How about their hat pin? So that would make sense why the woman's hats would be laying right next to their head neatly and no pin. Not one of the victims had a hat pin. So I think that kind of points at Diemschutz's profession. And later on, remember I told you he was arrested for another violent crime less than 6 months after the double event. When he went to court for that crime, he had already figured, oh, man, it's getting hot. He didn't say he was a costume jeweler. This time, when he was arrested, he said he was a horseshoer. That was his profession. He went from costume jewelry salesman to horseshoer. Okay, and I don't know how you do that, but let's don't forget that the Ripper was known to be wearing a horseshoe tie pin. So is it a play on that, the fact that he knew people were saying he wore a horseshoe tie pin, or did he wear a horseshoe tie pin because he was a horseshoer too? You know, any way you look at it, his profession points towards and not away from him. It certainly wouldn't convict him in a court of law, but it's one of many little bits of evidence that add up and point at him strongly.
Mm-hmm. So why do you think that the professions of all three of the suspects were relevant to the case? Like, what part did their professions play in them coming under suspicion? Well,
first of all, remember, maybe you hadn't joined us yet, but I had mentioned earlier tonight that the Ripper was described as having worn a huge number, well, not a huge number, but like 12 to 15 different hats. And a similar number, you know, they described different hats. Deerstalker, like Sherlock Holmes wears, a peaked cap, a wide-awake hat, like the Jewish men wear, and a number of different hats. And he was also described as wearing quite a number of different coats, you know, like a cutaway coat, a long coat, an astrakhan coat, and different types of coats. So here we have my three suspects. Well, Friedman and Kozbrodsky, as well as Diemschutz's wife, were all hat makers. And Friedman was also a tailor. He had a tailor shop really, really close to the International Working Men's Educational Club. So we have a tailor and three hat makers. And I think that's relevant to the case because of the fact that there is a strong connection between hats and coats, not only the hats and coats that the Ripper was known to have worn, the different ones, but also the victims. At least three of my victims bought a hat within 24 hours of their death. And one of them, her hat was found a mile away from the murder scene on the most direct route back to the IWMEC from the murder scene. So there's this hat thing going on. It's one of these pervasive things in the case that keeps coming up. Hats and coats and aprons and shawls. You know, it's an odd thing, but it fits with the group of people who are involved in the hat and coat and tailoring industry.
Gotcha. So in the book, I was just curious about another kind of like rabbit hole I'm going off in, but on Diemschutz's surname, what did you uncover about his surname? This was kind of fascinating to me.
You know, that's a really weird thing. Okay, Diemschutz is actually not a real surname. Now, back to the police back in those days, they wouldn't have known. It was just like, wow, foreign name. But, I mean, even, doesn't it sound kind of strange to you as a surname? I mean, have you ever met anyone with such a surname? You haven't, because it doesn't exist. What Diemschutz translates to, it translates to protector of noble women. It also could be translated to protector made of smoke, like smoke and mirrors, you know, or, you know, up in smoke, disappearing, you know, like evanescent. So it's a strange surname for a person. It's a fake name. And I believe that Diemschutz was the intelligent one and he liked word games. He's the one that was the Sherlock Holmes reader that did the graffito and played word games, wrote the letters to the police. And I think that Diemschutz got a kick out of giving himself a fake name. I think he was brought into the country by a very wealthy Russian socialist who hated England. And I think that he had a history of paying people to kill other people for political reasons. He was actually convicted for it and served time in jail for it. So we know he was a guy who hired others to kill others for political reasons. I believe that Prince Kropotkin hired Diemschutz, brought him, recruited him from Russia. I think Diemschutz was probably a soldier and or scholar. And I think that he brought him to England and told him, you're going to come into the country under a fake name. You're going to run this club for me, and then you're going to do these murders for me, and then you're going to get the hell back out of Dodge and go back to Russia. So when you come into the country, you're going to come in under an assumed name. And I think that Diemschutz himself chose that name because it means protector of – Diem in Russian means dame, like Dame Judith Dench, like the equivalent of a knight in England, but a dame. And Schutz means protector. So like dame protector, like a knight that would protect noble women. Well, prostitutes are the antithesis of a noble woman. Or it could also translate as protector of smoke. And I think in his case, he probably knew that it was both and thought, there's a good one. Because it's kind of both, because he was both. And I think that he wanted to be the protector of noble women that went up in smoke after each murder and disappeared.
So is that your interpretation of Jack's motives?
I think that his motive was primarily to end the Jewish plight in London, in England. I think what he wanted to do was destroy the public image of the British Empire. They used to say the sun never sets on the British Empire. And, the British were colonizing lots of countries around the world, like India, for example, and Africa. And I think that what he was trying to do, what Diemschutz, what Kropotkin ultimately was trying to do, was to discredit the British Empire, to bring shame, to call the world's attention to that worst part of England, that poverty, that disease, the prostitution. I think his ultimate motive, though, was to benefit the prostitutes, not first, but socialists, communists, anarchists, they despise prostitution, not prostitutes. They don't hate prostitutes per se, but they hate prostitution. They think of that as the absolute worst exploitation of man or woman that there is on earth, beyond even slavery. So they hate prostitution. And I believe that the Ripper's ultimate goal, even in killing prostitutes, was to benefit prostitutes, using them as martyrs in order to benefit the group, like, Spock about, the helping the many. I think that they probably thought, listen, we're going to have to kill 12 of you, but thousands of you are going to benefit. That's a lot better odds than we're going to have to kill millions of you in Vietnam, so, or hundreds of thousands of you, so millions will benefit. I think that their ultimate motive really was, I hate to say it, I really hate to say it, but I actually believe it was altruistic. I think that their motivation was to help their people. And what I really hate to say is I think they accomplished it. I think their mission was accomplished. When Diemschutz returned to Russia, I think he went there with the full satisfaction that mission was accomplished.
Was there any evidence that you developed against this prince?
Oh, Prince Kropotkin? Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Prince Kropotkin, let me tell you a little bit about him. Prince Kropotkin was, Peter Kropotkin was a Russian socialist anarchist. He was one of the better known thinkers of that period of time. Have you ever been in a big city and seen people graffitiing on a building, a great big red circle with an A in it?
Yep.
That's the anarchy symbol.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably the logo for the Sons of Anarchy TV show. I'm guessing, but that symbol was created by Prince Kropotkin, and he was one of the founders of the anarchist movement. Now, Prince Kropotkin his mother was a Christian, and she actually even built a church to the Theotokos, which is the Greek name of the Mother of God. And I believe that Kropotkin probably resented his mom spending time and money in the church, because he became a very vehement opponent to Christianity, and I think that was part of their motivation as well, an attack on Christianity. But Prince Kropotkin was actually a prince. He was a royal. He wasn't a very high royal, but he was a royal blood from Russia, and he was imprisoned twice in his life and ejected from Switzerland under suspicion of involvement in the assassination of Tsar Alexander II. So Kropotkin was actually forced to leave Switzerland at the insistence of the Russian government. And, you know, Switzerland is famous for being neutral in everything.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, Kropotkin was actually kicked out of Switzerland. That's not easy to do. But he received so many death threats from the Russian Holy League. That was an organization that was designed to protect the Tsarist regime. Kropotkin was under suspicion of having arranged that murder and paying people to do that murder for him. And so he actually even was kicked out of Switzerland, which is not easy to do on that suspicion. But later on in France, Kropotkin was again arrested under suspicion that he played a role in the terrorist attacks that took place in Lyon. But they were never able to adequately prove it, but yet he was still in prison because of the strong suspicion. And he spent 3 years in prison over there in a place called Clairvaux prison. And then after he got out of prison, they kicked him out of France, and then he went to England to live, and into London, where I believe that's when he cooked up the scheme to bring England down. You know, he, in his writings, if you look at the animation I did on my webpage or on YouTube, you can see an animation I did, and I have some quotations from Kropotkin's writing where he's praising Jack the Ripper and telling people that, you know, Jack the Ripper actually did good work, and if we really looked hard at what Jack the Ripper did, we would agree with him, and we would hold any judge who would condemn him in contempt, and any judge that would condemn him is the one that really would deserve to die. And rather than trying to execute Jack the Ripper for killing those prostitutes, we would be better off killing the people that own the buildings where those prostitutes do their work. You know, it just seems odd to me that a Russian thinker, socialist, would be so adamantly in favor of Jack the Ripper. I think that he knew that somebody like me would come along eventually and uncover that he was behind it. So he wrote a little sort of apology or excuse to his followers so that they would understand why he did what he did.
Oh, okay. Well, how do the Ripper crimes compare to, you know, modern terrorism, and how does maybe propaganda play into the crimes?
Well, you know, I believe that the Ripper crimes were actually committed as a form of propaganda, which is a political tool that we know is very popular with the Russians, which is what Deemschutz was and Kropotkin. I think that they were trying to use the killings as propaganda, as publicity for their cause, to get people aware of the plight of the Jew in Whitechapel and in England in general. And I think that they used the idea that sex sells, that, you know, salacious murder of prostitute is going to get people's attention over there onto Whitechapel. And I think that was the propaganda aspect. I think that they used, I mean, for example, you asked me about the International Working Men's Educational Club today. And the only reason that you even know that they existed is because of the Ripper crimes. If there was never a Jack the Ripper, none of us would ever even know that the Educational Club existed. But at that time period, it was the most popular site on earth that day. Everybody in the world was talking about the International Working Men's Educational Club. That was a form of propaganda. As far as modern terrorism goes, the terrorists use propaganda today. Look at these, like, I hate to compliment them. You know, they have these ISIS videos with the music and, you know, multiple camera angles and high definition, you know, where they're murdering people, they're slaying martyrs. You know, well, that's exactly what what's going on today. They're committing these crimes. They're choosing significant dates, as did the Ripper. They're choosing significant dates, and they're going to places like Westminster Abbey, or they're going to iconic places and committing acts of terrorism to bring attention to their cause as a form of propaganda. Why do we know who ISIS are? And just like with the Ripper, Louis Diemschutz was gloating about how the newspapers were publicizing the IWMEC the day after the Ripper, the double event Ripper murders. And he was gloating over how they were giving him money to fund the very program that would destroy them. And the ISIS people are doing the same thing today. They're saying, oh, look at CNN, and Fox News. They're running this thing over and over and over again, or on the internet, on Facebook. They're running this video over and over and over again, and they're giving us free publicity. They're bringing our name out more and more. People that would have never heard of us are suddenly aware of who we are and what we do and what we stand for. Well, that's pretty much what the Ripper crimes were doing. They were getting free publicity for their cause by committing these crimes, and they finally decided to do it right in front of their club to really call attention to themselves. Hey, everybody, look at us. We're the International Working Men's Educational Club. We're socialists. And I think that very much like what they're doing today, it's not much different.
So do you think that the facial mutilations on Catherine Eddowes, I think I'm saying that right, was Eddowes. Was that, symbolic of, their message they were trying to, their calling card?
Oh, yes. If your viewers go to my webpage or go to the YouTube thing, I think it's called the McCarthy Letter. And if you go to that on YouTube and take a look, I had a forensic artist recreate the face of Catherine Eddowes after the murder with all the mutilations done. Mm-hmm. And what we did is we took the police sketch, the police description, the photographs, the postmortem, and he did a forensic drawing of the injuries. And the one thing that I did that I don't think anyone else has ever done before me, certainly I've never heard of it, was, remember I told you earlier, the doctors believed that when the murderer killed Catherine Eddowes, he was kneeling to the left side of the body. So what I did was I took the drawing of her face and I turned it so it was oriented as if it would be if I were kneeling next to her with her head pointing towards the left. Mm-hmm. And when you do that and you rotate that picture, it is glaringly obvious that there are the initials IK, IK, IK carved into her face 3 times. As on one of them, IMK, which was Isaac Kozubratski's middle initial. It was his name was Isaac M. Kozubratsky. And you can, if you kneel to the side of the body or hold that picture in that orientation as though you were kneeling to the side of the body, you can see where a kid who was given a knife and told, carve her face to smithereens. What's a kid going to do when you give him a knife and tell him to carve? If you told the kid to carve something into a picnic table or a tree, what's he going to carve? His initials, probably. Mm-hmm. I think that he was kneeling in front of that body and he was told, mutilate that face beyond recognition. And so he went, okay, what am I? And I think he carved his initials in her face 3 times. And if you look at that drawing and you turn it the way I told you, or you take the original police drawing and turn it, you'll see IK 3 times in her face, as well as the M of Isaac M. Kozubratsky. Now, wow. At the same time, there are people that would say, oh, it's, I've heard people say, oh, he was trying to make her look like a clown. Oh, it was some kind of ancient symbolic. Yeah, no, it's not. It's IMK. You can see it. It's plain as day, unless you want to deny it for whatever reason. It's very clearly IK, IK, IK 3 times. But if you don't want to believe that, you could also say it's VI, 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 which is 666 in Roman numerals, which is the language of the church. The Roman, the Italian, the Latin. So if you don't want to see IK because you don't want Randy to be right, you'll see VI, VI, VI 666, which I've never heard anyone else claim that either. All I've ever heard is, it's random mutilation, or it's trying to make her look like a clown. And I think whoever is trying to say it was James Maybrick, they did point out the M on the chin. That's M for Maybrick. So somebody was trying to say it was Maybrick, James Maybrick. Well, it's very simple.
Like,
you look at, sorry?
Oh, it just doesn't seem like what they're doing is any way, shape, or form random.
Oh, no. Not at all. Not at all. I think if you took a 17-year-old doofus and sat him down next to a picnic table, and you gave him a knife and said, here, carve something in the table, I think 9 times out of 10 they would carve their initials.
That's true.
But that could just be my opinion, but that's what I think. And I think when he was knelt next to that body and he was told, I want that woman's face mutilated beyond recognition, he went, okay, boss. And then he did his initials. Yeah, that's my opinion. But it's not my opinion how clear it is to see IK if you want to, look at it for yourself.
Well, speaking of the McCarthy letter, what is your take on the Ripper letters? Dear Boss, From Hell, Open, the list goes on. And especially the one I just recently learned about, the Little Child letter.
Oh, yeah, yep. Well, the Little Child letter, I'm not positive. Are you still there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, yeah. Okay, sorry. Something on my phone just went crazy. But anyway, the Little Child letter, I can't vouch for it being real, although it may. But there are certainly 4 that I believe are authentic. And I believe that first of all, the From Hell absolutely is authentic. Why? It came with a piece of the woman's kidney in a box. And it went to the head of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee, George Lusk, who is somebody that was going around beating up innocent Jews in Whitechapel. Diemschutz would have hated him. Diemschutz would have hated that guy with a purple passion. And, here's a guy going around beating up Jews in his very neighborhood. Diemschutz would have wanted that guy, wanted his head on a platter. So he receives this package with the woman's kidney in it. That had to be real, even though you'll find ripperologists out there that will say it's not. It was absolutely real. So I believe that letter was authentic. The Openshaw letter then had to be real, in my opinion, because it's obviously written by the same guy that wrote the From Hell. Now, if you look at the envelope of the McCarthy letter, that's obviously written by the same guy that did the Openshaw letter. You can see that there are 2 different handwritings on the front on the envelope and on the letter. It's very obvious that 2 people wrote the McCarthy letter, and that one of those 2 people is the same guy that did the Openshaw letter and From Hell letter. So, it's kind of the McCarthy letter is brought in by that fact. And I believe that the Saucy Jackie postcard that warned the police about the double event, I believe that one was real because it was mailed before the event and it predicted not only the double event, which was very important for Diemschutz as part of his alibi. He needed the police to know there was going to be a double killing because he needed them to not suspect him of the second murder because he was with them after the first one. So I believe that the Saucy Jackie postcard was for real because it predicted not only the double event, but it predicted that the woman's ear would be cut off. And it was. Catherine Eddowes' ear was cut off in the double event murder. So I believe the Saucy Jackie postcard had to have been real as well because it predicted things that someone else could never have predicted but the killer.
Well, didn't the newspapers have something to do with this too? With some fake news, as they call today, fake news.
Yeah. Fake news, yeah. Fake news was invented back then. Now, let me tell you. First of all, there were a couple of guys that claimed to have written the Ripper letters. And for some reason, people believe them. But everybody is very quick to say, oh, the Ripper didn't write those letters. Those are copycats. Those are people trying to get credit trying to insert themselves and become famous by lying about having written this letter. Follow me? Yeah. But yet nobody seems to think that a newspaper guy might be lying about having written the letter. You see what I'm getting at here? I think that people, the newspaper guys, would say, "Oh, I wrote it," and try to take credit or try to make themselves famous for coining the name Jack the Ripper. I invented that name. I invented it. And everybody believes that he did it and he invented the name. But nobody believes that the killer actually wrote the letters, even though we know he wrote one because he sent a piece of kidney with it. I think he did that because he wrote the first letter and people started taking credit for it, and other kind of crackpots started writing letters too. So I think he was getting kind of fed up with it, and he was like, all right, listen, this one's real. Here, look at this. It came with a piece of kidney. Believe me now? So I think he was kind of goaded into doing that. So I know that a lot of people wrote fake letters. There's no question there. But I don't think they thought of it. I think the first letters were for real. And then people said, oh, the killer writing letters to the police? And then they started copycatting. But I don't think that the idea was invented by the public or the newspaper. I think that was invented by the Ripper himself. And then other people followed suit. And some newspapers probably did write letters and said, oh, let's write a letter to ourselves, and then we can get a bunch of readers to read our paper because we've got a Ripper letter, So I don't doubt that happened. But those letters that I named off, the Saucy Jackie, the From Hell, the Openshaw, and the McCarthy, those were the Ripper. Those really were him. Because we know, well, nobody knows, but I know that the From Hell letter was from Jack the Ripper. There's no question. It came with a piece of kidney that matched the piece missing from the body. You're going to have a hard time convincing me some newspaper man would find such a kidney and put it in a box and ship it to somebody nobody ever heard of, except Jews in Whitechapel that hated him. He would send it to the newspaper. He would send it to the police. He wouldn't send it to George Lusk. Only somebody that hated George Lusk would send that to him. Mm-hmm. So anyway, if you're going to believe that the From Hell letter is real, in my book, and there are many that would disagree with me, I'm sure many, but if you're going to believe the From Hell letter is real, then you have to believe the Openshaw letter is real. And if you believe the Openshaw letter is real, you have to believe the McCarthy letter is real. And then you have no choice but then to believe, after you read the McCarthy letter and see what I uncovered in it, you have to believe it's Deemschutz. And if you believe it's Deemschutz, you have to believe the Saucy Jackie letter is for real too. Mm-hmm. Maybe even the Dear Boss, which newspaper guys claim to have written it. Maybe they did. But absolutely, I think that there's a good chance the Dear Boss letter is for real, but it's possible it's fake. But not Saucy Jackie or the others I named. I think those are all definitely Deemschutz. And also, let's remember there's two different handwritings on the McCarthy letter. Why? Because Deemschutz wrote one part and Kozbrodsky or Friedman wrote the other part. And that's why there's different handwritings in the different letters. Because there's three guys doing it.
Randy, do these letters still exist, and where are they?
Yes. Yeah. Some of the letters, I think maybe one or two of them have disappeared, but there are photographic evidence of it. Scotland Yard has a lot of it. The British Archives have a lot of it. Some bits of evidence of the Ripper case have mysteriously disappeared because different police officials snagged it and took it home, as a souvenir or whatever. So you can't find all of them, but there's certainly photographic evidence of most of them, of all of them. There's photographic evidence of all of them, and most of them are in possession of the British Archives. You can even occasionally see them on display. Like occasionally there's a museum in London called the Docklands Museum right by the waterfront, and they every couple of years do a Jack the Ripper display, and they usually bring out the letters, the real ones, and they have them in a glass case you can go see.
Wow. Well, with so many internal organs being taken away from these ladies, and also I think one of the letters mentioned about eating parts of the body.
Yes,
do you think the Ripper was? Do you think the Ripper was a cannibal?
I think that the Ripper. Oh, I'm going to go on a limb here. This is a sensitive issue. It's a very sensitive issue. It has to do with racism, and that's a touchy one. Let me say this: I believe he wanted to shock the world with that letter and claim to have eaten the other kidney. I think that he did that to shock the world. Now, I believe that he had read the book Moby Dick, which was published like 20 years before the Ripper killings. And it was a favorite among socialists because Captain Ahab was a socialist captain, whaling captain. And he was, a Jewish man that was working under the plight of oppression for slave wages and a dangerous job, whaling. And I think that Moby Dick was a must-read for all socialists back then. And that's where I think the line "from hell" came from, because the last line of Moby Dick is "from hell's heart I stab at thee," and then he stabs the whale. So I think that, that's Ahab's last line. I think that Deemschutz, having been an avid reader of Sherlock Holmes and of Moby Dick, I think he got not only the line "from hell" from Moby Dick, but I think he also got the idea of cannibalism from Moby Dick, because that was a very foreign concept to the British, the Victorian prudish way of thought back then. I think that because if you remember from reading Moby Dick when you were a kid, you'll remember that Moby Dick's second mate was Queequeg, the cannibal.
Mm-hmm.
So I think he got the idea for the cannibalism from Moby Dick. And I think that was probably bullshit. I think that was probably a shock value tactic, propaganda. But I do think they did something with the blood, because the blood from the victims was remarkably missing at some of the killings. And it matches the fact that the blood was missing and the cuts on the necks of the women matches a very time-worn ritual Jewish killing called shechita, kosher killing of animals. And I think that the victims show the exact signs of having been killed in the shechita, kosher killing manner that the shochet, or the ritual Jewish butcher, uses to kill animals. And they collect the blood in a cup that's called a kli sharet. And I think that something similar was done to the women. And that's probably about all I want to say about that.
Can you tell what the timeline was from the time that she was killed to the time somebody received that kidney? Would it have been like a day, a week, or?
You know what? I want to say, I can look it up for you, but I want to say it was sort of more than a week. But let me just, I can get you that information right away. Let me just have a second, and I'll find out while we're talking. But it wasn't a very long period.
They didn't have ice back then to keep it, and it would probably deteriorate a little bit, right?
Oh yeah. Well, it was preserved in wine.
Oh, okay.
So, but let me do this. I can probably tell you. Let me just find.
I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but I just always have weird thoughts.
No, I was thinking about when he said wine. I'm like, preserving wine. I'm like, I preserve my kidneys in wine all the time.
Yeah, really.
Yeah,
was it kosher
my
wine?
kidneys. That's actually a good way to keep your kidneys preserved, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
Let me see if I can tell you I should know that, but it was the letter that came to Lusk came on the 17th of October. So here we have that was like 2 weeks. It was more than 2 weeks.
Wow.
So yeah, I had to look it up because I didn't have the date memorized that he received the letter. But it was the October 17th is when he got the letter. So more than 2 weeks, but the kidney was well preserved, and that kidney it was examined by Dr. Openshaw, the Openshaw letter that I had talked about, and Dr. Openshaw examined that kidney, and he said that kidney, number one, matched the other kidney. It matched the victim. It matched the fact that she was suffering from something called Bright's disease. and this kidney that was received in the mail had symptoms of Bright's disease. Also, there's a renal artery, like a tube that leads to the kidney, and it's say 4 inches long in total. And the renal artery in the body that was still there was 1 inch remaining in the body. And the kidney that was received in the mail had 3 inches remaining on it. So everything tallied with this kidney having been the same one from the victim. So in order to think that was fake, one would have to believe that a newspaper reporter would be kind of adventurous enough or industrious enough to go find a woman's kidney that has Bright's disease and then cut off just the right amount of the renal artery to make it match and preserve it for 2 weeks before sending it out to the George Lusk, who no one had ever heard of up to that point. You know what I mean? This doesn't make sense.
Right.
It makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense for Louis Diemschutz to do so, because why? He hated that guy. I'm sure he hated George Lusk, almost enough to kill him, because, here's this guy Lusk running around his neck of the woods, his neighborhood, Whitechapel, where Diemschutz felt like he was the little king of, George Yard, George Yard Stable, St. George's in the east in Whitechapel. And I think he thought of it as little Georgia, like that country that's part of Russia, or used to be. I think that he thought that this guy was running around beating up his people. There were probably guys coming into the International Working Men's Educational Club with black eyes and lumps on their head saying, I just got the shit kicked out of me by this guy, George Lusk. And that's why they chose him to torment with the kidney and not the newspaper and not the I think if the newspaper reporter wrote that and managed to get his hands on a kidney to do so, he would have sent it to his own newspaper.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, I've noticed and I've been reading a little bit about where they have a shawl and they've been running DNA tests on it. Do you think after 1 years that DNA testing could point out to who Jack the Ripper was?
Absolutely, but not in the case of the shawl, because the shawl has already been kind of discredited anyway. Even if it were the shawl, there's no chain of custody on it. There's no telling who's handled it, even if it were the shawl, which there's no way of proving it is, it's just too degraded. No court of law in the world would ever accept it as evidence, because it's just, there's no chain of custody on it, meaning a record, a documented record of where it's been and who's had it and who's touched it, and it hasn't been handled properly as evidence. There's just no way in that case. However, to answer your question, absolutely, I believe that DNA could be used to solve this case, because if there's anybody in the world that could do it, it would be Dr. Henry Lee. And let me give you a scenario. Let's say that finally my theory makes its way to the future King of England, and who's just had a baby and, is someday going to be the king. If that guy got a hold of my book, read it, and said, you know what, I think this guy's onto something. I think he's got enough proof. And if he were to okay the exhuming of not the traditional victims, but Martha Tabram and Emma Smith, I think that we could match any possible DNA from them with the possibly DNA from Isaac Kozbrodsky first, because he was the rapist of the group. Emma Smith said that she was raped by the 19-year-old. I think we could probably find a way to use that 129-year-old DNA to link Kozbrodsky to Emma Smith and Martha Tabram. Yes, I think it's possible.
Wow. Well, with all your traveling and all you, because I'm sure you've been there. I think I've heard you last time when we talked, you've been there. And have you, because where I deal in the paranormal and stuff, and also my cousin Jennifer, have you had any paranormal experiences at any of these locations during your research that you couldn't explain?
I have.
If you had,
Well, I haven't, but there people have. I mean, there are people that go and do the investigation, the paranormal investigations at some of the locations. Like, for example, the 10 Bells Pub, I think that they've had a number of paranormal groups come in there because people believe that Jack the Ripper frequented the 10 Bells Pub. Mm-hmm. He may or may not. As a Jewish man in the 1880s, I don't know how welcome he would have felt in that pub. Maybe, I really don't know. I don't know. I don't have any evidence to say that Deemschutz drank in there, but there have been people that have claimed to get some sort of response at the 10 Bells. But I would really, be very, very excited. I have some friends here in Pennsylvania that are involved in that kind of thing too. They have a paranormal group out here that I've just learned about. I would be very excited about bringing a group out there to London and taking them to the sites that I know are related to the Ripper, not just the murder sites, but maybe some sites that other people didn't really consider that strongly because Deemschutz and company have never been strongly considered as suspects. In fact, never been considered suspects at all. So there could be some paranormal openings for paranormal investigations on places that other people really, like the IWMEC. Okay, it's been ripped down, but we know where it was, and we might be able to do some sort of, I don't know. I'm not an expert in that field. You are. But is there some way we could go to some of the victims, and if you knew who the killer was, is there a message you might be able to receive from I don't know. I mean, I don't know about these things, but if there is, we certainly have information that would lead us to maybe finding out the truth that other people would miss. So I think it's a great idea to try and do a paranormal investigation, maybe go to the grave of Louis Deemschutz, and talk to his ass and, see what he has to say. He might actually be down there going, yes, finally, somebody got my message,
Yeah, that'd be great.
That's interesting. Now, where is he buried at?
We don't know. That's my next mission in life. When I get this History Channel contract, one of the things that I'm going to really kind of lobby for is for them to send me to Russia to find out where Deemschutz is buried. And on my next trip to England, I've always been very busy on my trips to England with work and with working on this case and reenacting the murders. But what I want to do is I need to get back to England and find out where Kozbrodsky's buried and Friedman. Whatever happened to them? How did they die? When and where? Where did they move to? Did they go back to Poland? If so, where are they buried? And I think that would be an awesome aspect to the History Channel show, is to have kind of a paranormal episode where we go to the graves of these guys and the victims and kind of, go to Martha Tabram's grave and say, hey, Martha, did you know Louis Deemschutz? And then your Geiger counter starts going off the chart, or something like that. I don't know, but I think it's a really cool avenue to explore for sure.
Yeah, I'll be in England next year, so I will definitely check that out for you. And I have been to the 10 Bells, actually. I had a pint of beer there. It was very exciting.
Oh,
wow. Everybody's well traveled. I just travel around the country.
Yeah, I've done a lot. I've been very fortunate.
Randy, do you think that Scotland Yard has anything else that they're holding on to that they haven't released that may be released in the near future? Any type of evidence?
They say they don't. I think they do, but I don't think they're necessarily holding it back. I think they just don't know what they have, because no one's ever, for example, nobody's ever suspected Deemschutz besides me that I've ever heard of. So I know that Deemschutz served time in Pentonville Prison. So somewhere over there in England, somebody has his booking documents and photographs from Pentonville Prison. They've probably not been destroyed. I mean, they might have been destroyed in World War II. They might have been burned, ruled irrelevant. But there's a possibility that those records are there. And with those records, there could be potential evidence. let's say, for example, I work in a jail. We take property from the prisoners when they're booked in. And we take their clothing, their shoes, any jewelry they're wearing, their cell phones nowadays. Well, in those days, they would have taken anything Diemschutz owned. They would have taken his clothing, his costume jewelry.
Mm-hmm.
They would have taken, his diary if he kept one with him, anything like that. They would have kept it. And guess what would be on the clothing? DNA. And guess what? If it were still somehow, they might have given it back when he got out of jail, or they might have lost it, and it might be sitting somewhere. That's not impossible. There's times when it's difficult to find the inmate stuff these days. Maybe in those days they could have lost it and then found it later, and it could be sitting somewhere in a dungeon in London, or outside of London at Pentonville Prison. There could be some room in which Diemschutz's DNA sits and his costume jewelry. We just don't know. And there's tons of stuff in the archives that I don't think it's necessarily being held back as evidence that we have this and we're not releasing it. I think it's just it's evidence that's there. But since nobody knew it was Diemschutz and Kozbrodsky and Friedman, then their arrest records and all of their pertinent information is somewhere, but it's not being held back per se. It's just not been looked at.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that answers your question, but
it does. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Well, we're running out of time, but I got one question before we go. Is it true that author Lewis Carroll was a suspect, of being the Ripper? And if so, what made him be a suspect?
Well, you'd have to ask the whack job that, I can't tell you why they think. I mean, you'd have to ask whoever came up with that one. Here's the thing. With the Lewis Carroll, with the James Maybrick, with the Walter Sickert, it reminds me a lot, and I might be stepping on some toes here. I don't want to step on anybody's toes, but there are people in the world that believe in reincarnation, and Buddhism preaches reincarnation, and you may or may not believe in reincarnation. I'm not agreeing or disagreeing with that belief, but I will say this: a lot of times, armchair detectives, very much like armchair Buddhists, not real Buddhists, but people that play at it to look good, that believe in reincarnation. They were always Cleopatra or Napoleon or Jesus. They were never a plumber or a garbage man, in a previous life. They were always some illustrious personage, You never hear anybody say, "Yeah, in a past life I was, that guy that sweeps up the hair at the barber shop after they cut your hair. I was that guy." They were never that guy. They were always this illustrious person, right? Although with reincarnation you're supposed to keep doing it till you do it right. Well, so theoretically, all of your past incarnations should be lesser people than you, one would think. But anyway, I think that people want to name illustrious people as Jack the Ripper because it's glamorous, and because there isn't a lot of records available to them handily about just the average Joe. But every time a serial killer is apprehended, it's never Harrison Ford. It's always, that guy was really nice. He used to take my garbage out for me. I never would have thought he would do something like this. He used to walk old ladies across the street. Very helpful guy. It's never, oh my God, Harrison Ford is a serial killer. It's not a famous person. It's not Arthur Conan Doyle. It's not Lewis Carroll, who wrote Alice in Wonderland. It's not James Maybrick, the famous cotton merchant who was poisoned in a very famous case where his wife was convicted for poisoning him. He was a personage. It's not Walter Sickert, the painter to the royal family. It's easy to name people like that because they're famous, and because there's a lot of record on them that you can investigate, and you can find out where they lived and who their friends were and what they did because they're famous. But there's millions that weren't famous, and the Ripper was one of those unknown type people. Well, it was the only reason anyone knows who Diemschutz was because he found a body, quote unquote. But no, it wasn't Lewis Carroll. It wasn't Walter Sickert. It wasn't anybody famous. It was just the guy next door, the nice guy that used to take your garbage out for you and help old ladies cross the street.
Wow. Well, Randy, I appreciate you coming on the show. And can you tell people, if you got any plans for the rest of 2017 and how to get a copy of your book and your website and all that good stuff?
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for that opportunity. Well, listen, my book is called Sherlock Holmes and the Autumn of Terror. That's the time period when the Ripper was striking. They called it the Autumn of Terror. So my book's called Sherlock Holmes and the Autumn of Terror. You can get it on Amazon. It's available. It's doing pretty well out there. You can grab it on Amazon. My website, I'm on Facebook, and the book page is Sherlock Holmes and the Autumn of Terror. And the web page itself, I think, is called, if you like Google or if you search it on Facebook, I think it comes up under Randy Williams versus Jack the Ripper. Randy Williams vs. Jack the Ripper with no spaces, and that would pull it up. If you want to see the animation I talked about with the facial mutilation and stuff, you want to go to YouTube and look up the McCarthy letter. I think it's called Jack the Ripper, the McCarthy letter, MCC. That'll bring up that animation. So that's how to get me. And, go on my page. I answer any messages people might write to me. Check out the YouTube or pick up the book. I promise you won't be disappointed. It's written in the style of Arthur Conan Doyle. So if you like the Sherlock Holmes stories, the way they were written back then, I was very faithful to that writing style. It might be a little bit difficult to read for the modern reader, but, just like Arthur Conan Doyle, I use those old terms and things, but wherever necessary, I did explain them with footnotes and context clues. So I never leave the reader feeling dumb. My goal was to make the reader feel smart, not dumb. So whenever there's something that I know the average American reader wouldn't understand, not because he's not educated and not because he's not smart, but because he or she isn't from England in the 1800s, I made it an effort to explain those things. So you'll get used to it. If you have a little trouble reading it at first, you'll get used to it for sure.
Well, I appreciate you coming on the show, Randy. It's always fascinating speaking to you and learning. It's always a pleasure and learning so much more about the Ripper and the Rippers. And it's
ripping.
The
Ripper and the Rippy.
Yeah, the Ripper and the Rippy.
The Rippy.
That sounds like a new rock group. But again, I won't take up no more of your time, and I appreciate you coming on the show, and I look forward to having you back on as soon as I can get you back on, and we'll talk more about the Ripper and the Rippies.
Oh yeah, I got tons. Believe me, I could talk about this for hours. My friends are all sick of talking to me about it. But thanks for having me on. It's been a pleasure. I really, I enjoyed it. You can probably tell I have a ball talking about this stuff. And thank you for the opportunity to get my theory out there a little bit more. I hope some of your listeners will pick up the book.
Oh, I hope they will too. If they don't, I'll hunt you down. Buy his book. There might be some more ripping going on. I'm just kidding. I wouldn't hurt nobody.
Yeah.
And I want to thank Jennifer, my cousin, for jumping on the show and helping me out. You did a great job. She's a professional. Yeah. I'm not.
It was very nice talking to you. I mean, I missed Robin. It was nice talking to Robin last time, but it was nice having you on board. And thanks for your questions.
All right, we appreciate you. And I am definitely going to check out the book. I'm going to go to Amazon and get it tonight.
Lovely. Thank you. And don't forget to give me a review if you like it. If you hate it, don't give me a review.
That's how that works. Well, Randy, you have a good night. Jennifer, you have a good night too. And I appreciate both of you. Y'all have a safe weekend.
All right, man. Take care. Bye, guys.
Okay, bye-bye. Well, that's it for us tonight. I want to thank Randy for coming on the show. I have nothing but huge respect for this man and the job he's doing and the job he has done. And also another huge thank you to my cousin Jennifer Shortridge of 222 Paranormal for coming on and helping me out. And I want to thank everyone that listened in. I'd like to give a big shout out to the Vibe Radio Network, to Holly and Ryan for putting up with me and everyone else I have on my show. Also to the first responders and our men and women in armed services, thank you all for your service. Our guest for next Thursday night, September 14th, will be Dr. Irina Scott. She has a PhD at the University of Missouri College of Veterinary Medicine and Physiology, Defense Intelligence Agency, satellite photography researcher, physical scientist in the DMA Aerospace Center astronomer, and author. So tune in next week to another exciting show starting at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Everyone, if you can, go to our Facebook page and check out Within the Chaos. And don't forget to like the page and to see upcoming guests and along with past shows, postings. And you can also go to my website at www.blackdiamondps.org. And also to blogtalkradio.com/Within the Chaos. Thanks again. Until next week, everyone have a safe, please, especially with this damn hurricane coming in, everyone please be safe and have a great weekend and have a great night. That's it for me. Big guy's getting ready to go. I think I'm going to go get me something to drink. I've got a cotton mouth.